existing archetypes. But this is a lot different than anything I think we've seen in the past.
Yeah, and a lot of weird numbers here, some interesting singletons like a Cyclonic Rift, a Prophet of Krufix, for those of you who have been haunted by this card in Theros Booster Draft, quite powerful.
JD near his opponent, he's playing Mono Blue Devotion, a deck that you're probably familiar with, not nearly as interesting as Chris's, but still very, very powerful.
And a deck that's really receded in popularity in the last couple of months, but I think one that's poised to make a comeback if all of these aggressive strategies are starting to take hold in the metagame again.
Definitely, definitely. So Chris leads with a Scryland, and JD had a Judge's Familiar, and now we see it looks like an Elvish Mystic on Chris's side of the board.
And if you are JD, what are you thinking right now? You're looking at Temple of Mystery, Elvish Mystic, and Steam Vents? Something weird is going on here.
Yeah, I think a Rug Shell is, you're probably going to expect to see maybe Polychronos, maybe you'll see random cards, but again, Prophet of Krufix, definitely not a card that you see a lot of in Standard. And there is a foil. I cannot make out that card.
I believe that is that a Gore Clan Rampager that's been hard cast?
Yep, it could be a promo alt art Gore Clan Rampager. Yeah, so it's the FNM promo. It's pretty cool art.
Yeah, so not the most explosive card that Chris has access to there. He does have Kiora, Xenagos, Polychronos, but still a more than capable blocker.
So JD's got a pretty good start here to 1-drop, 2-drop into Thassa, pretty much what you want if you're Mono Blue Devotion. Don't know if he has that Master Waves, but Master Waves not nearly as devastating against Chris's deck because Chris actually has ways to kind of interact. He does have, I believe, Cyclonic Rift, maybe only one. He has that Polychronos in his deck, though. That's probably the main card he needs in this matchup.
Yeah, but as you mentioned, JD off to a great start here, and Chris really under the gun. He has Binding of Thassa in his hand, but it's not clear he can take a turn off to do that.
So Chris makes 2 plays. He develops his mana a little more with a second Elvish Mystic, and he plays a Scavenging Ooze as well. Scavenging Ooze is a card we've been seeing a lot of this weekend.
Yeah.
So JD here, he can choose to attack with the Gore Clan Rampager. And it looks like, yes, he is going to attack post casting both spells, and now JD drops to 16. JD's still in a pretty good position here, but Chris is going to have a lot of mana to work with next turn.
Yeah, this is a very aggressive line from Chris here, opting to attack, as he is a bit under the gun right now.
Yeah, so JD draws for the turn. He scries. I believe he scryed a card to the bottom. He has a bunch of land, but I don't know if he has another big high-impact spell. He does have that Thassa in play, obviously. Not sure if he has the Master Waves or not. Chris is still, he's at 18, plus he has a Scavenging Ooze in play now, so not in the worst shape for Chris. So here comes a Frostburn Weird from JD, and now he has more than 5 devotions, so Thassa is now a creature, and he targets it, making it unblockable, and swings for 6, so Chris drops to 12 life.
See if Chris can now capitalize on all this mana. He really could use an answer to Thassa. Kiora would give him a little bit of help, some removal spells.
Yeah, the problem is JD has him on a 2-turn clock with Thassa and Judge's Familiar. Chris, I believe, might have a Stormbreath Dragon in his hand as a blocker, but he does not have double red right now.
He does appear to have his 1 copy of Prophet of Krufix here.
Yeah, it looks like I see a Prophet, I see a Mizzy Mortars as well, so he's got some stuff to work with. Mizzy Mortars, he doesn't have nearly enough red to overload it, but he could potentially target one of the Frostburn Weirds and hope to just blank Chris on JD on Devotion, but looks like he's going to attack first with the Gore Clan Rampager. And despite the fact that Chris only has basically not that many attackers in play, they're such heavy hitters compared to JD's side of the board that the life totals are actually equal here.
Yeah, and now this is going to give JD really serious cause for pause as this Courser. What could Chris possibly play at instant speed here?
Yeah, so suddenly JD, despite the fact that he had a pretty good start, he has to figure, what does Chris have in his hand? I mean, there's anything that can jump. Again, Thassa can become unblockable. So he could just say, forget it, I'm going to just make Thassa unblockable and attack for 6 again, put you on a 1-turn clock. Probably his best course of action. But yeah, he definitely has to be a little worried here.
Yeah, and this is one of the advantages of playing a deck like Chris is playing. Your opponent right now is kind of grasping at straws, trying to figure out exactly what could happen to them.
So JD does just that. He makes Thassa unblockable after casting a Night Veil Spectre to ensure that he'll have Devotion. And Chris now drops to 6. Now, I don't think he has a creature in his hand that he can cast at instant speed. So he's just going to have to draw his card for the turn. And it looks like it's a Corsair Krufix, so that could be a good card there. It could, if he's able to have reveal a land on top of his library, then he can play that and gain a life, which will put him just out of the Thassa range, possibly. But again, JD can give multiple creatures unblockability.
Yeah, if he found a red source of mana that turn, he can cast Mizzium Mortars on something, untap all of his lands, play a Stormbreath Dragon inside of combat, potentially survive that attack, but needed too many things to break right there and wasn't able to put it together off of that Corsair Krufix.
Yeah, and I think that game, I mean, obviously JD's curved out pretty well early on, and the power of Thassa kind of took over the mid game there. But Chris's three-color deck kind of suffered from a little color screw there.
Yeah, very, the blue devotion deck is merciless and efficient and executes the same game plan over and over again. And it's very challenging on three-color creature decks that are trying to finagle and cobble together these various synergies. A lot of the reason you saw very little of this over the last couple of months is that Mono Blue Devotion just is ruthlessly efficient against those kind of strategies.
Yeah, particularly if you don't have any kind of ways to interact with the Mono Blue deck. I mean, if you can't deal with Thassa, which not many decks can, your only game plan is kind of out-tempo them, and Mono Blue is arguably the best tempo deck in the format, so it's going to be tough to do that.
So on Christopher's side of the sideboarding here, again, he's playing his Rug Monsters build. We did a deck tech on, should get posted tomorrow. He has an Aether Lane, 2 Negates, 2 Unravel the Aethers, 2 Mizzium Mortars, a Rorik Thar, a Progenitor Mimic, 3 copies of Mistcutter Hydra, and 3 copies of Nylea's Disciple. I think you're going to see the Mistcutter Hydras and the Nylea's Disciples come in here alongside the 2 copies of Mizzium Mortars.
Yeah, for a deck like Chris in this matchup, he basically just wants to make sure he can keep up with the tempo of the Mono Blue deck and then power through with cards like Hydra or Stormbreath Dragon.
Yeah, once he gets his mana set up and his board develops a little bit, he has a lot of powerful tools to work with. It's just JD's draw was just a little bit too fast that game, set Christopher behind, and by the time he could actually start developing his board and stabilizing, Thassa was already at sufficient devotion and was being made unblockable and so forth. So as long as Chris can keep his head above water, he should have an opportunity to start deploying his more powerful effects.
On JD's side, he's got a typical Mono Blue sideboard. He's got 3 copies of Dissolve, 3 copies of Gainsay for the control matchups, along with 3 copies of Jace, Architect of Thought. He has 2 Ratchet Bomb, 1 Aetherling, 1 Biden of Thassa, 1 Domestication, and 1 Rapid Hybridization. Obviously, I think Rapid Hybridization is a card that he's going to want to bring in. He doesn't know exactly what Chris is playing, but I think it's safe to say he's probably fearful of Polychronos, which is a card that could actually cause a lot of problems for JD. So I see Rapid Hybridization come in. I also like bringing in the Domestication. He did see Corsair. Corsair's actually a really good target for Domestication.
And Prophet of Krufix is about as juicy as it gets. I mean, if we're going to talk about what's the best possible thing in Standard to domesticate, that's got to be real close to the top of the list.
That is true. I didn't think I'd be saying that, but you are correct.
That's a juicy one right there.
Yeah, so I like the Domestication. I like the Rapid Hybridization. Ratchet Bomb, probably not where you want to be. Not sure about the Gainsay either. I mean, obviously he is playing blue, but I didn't see that many Gainsay targets besides the Prophet. So I'm not sure JD's going to want to bring him in, at least for game 2.
Yeah, and if Chris has any sort of sideboard action against you, it's likely to be Mistcutter Hydra and red removal spells. That's the most logical recipe you can imagine. And in that world, Gainsay doesn't make very much sense. Yes, Chris has blue cards, but that's not the beginning of the question. Is it actually the blue cards you care about fighting over? And I don't think the Prophet of Krufix that he saw, I think he can safely assume Kiora is floating around somewhere in Chris's deck. I don't know if that's enough of an incentive to go to Gainsay.
Yeah, I think JD doesn't really want to dilute his deck. I think he wants to kind of remain the quick tempo deck that he is. So honestly, beyond hybridization, domestication, I don't think he really wants to bring in too much more than that.
Yeah, the blue devotion deck often goes to more of a control shell in post-board games, anticipating a lot of removal on the opponent's side. Chris's deck looked so unwieldy in that first game that I think that JD is basically wants to keep his core strategy intact. I don't think he wants to go too crazy with Dissolves and Jaces, because that appears to be a game that Chris is pretty well equipped to handle. It's less clear if Chris can handle just 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop.
Yeah, and even though he does have some answers to Master Waves, he doesn't have nearly as many as a deck like Jund Monsters with cards like Ultimate Price and Golgari Charm. So JD could easily just win on Master Waves alone in this game. So I think he kind of wants to not make too many changes, particularly one, because I think his deck is kind of well suited for this matchup anyway, and 2, he doesn't really know what Chris is playing 100% yet. So you don't want to start guessing and guess wrong.
Yeah, you have like you said, you have some educated guesses, but you certainly, if you ask JD, write down the 60 cards right now that Chris is playing, he would probably miss by at least a dozen cards because he just didn't see very much of it, and Chris is playing a lot of weird numbers.
Exactly. So both players presented, and they're going to look at their opening 7 to see if they are comfortable with them. Chris Yarbrough lost the first game. So that is not actually 1 versus 0. That should be switched around but Chris has the option to play or draw now, and he's going to play. Looks like he's happy with his 7, and JD looks like he's going to keep his 7. Yes, and that's the good thing about Mono Blue. It doesn't mulligan very often. Doesn't really need to.
Yeah, most of your hands of lands and spells are pretty keepable.
Mm-hmm. So both players start off with lands. JD does not have a 1-drop, which is pretty good news for Chris because that's kind of one of the ways you get out-tempoed out. But and he didn't mulligan, so I have to imagine his hand's pretty solid if he doesn't have a 1-drop in it. So JD plays a Frostburn Weird on turn 2. Chris still doesn't have anything in play yet, but it looks like he might have a Domri in his hand. Does he have a 3rd mana to cast it?
Yeah, he also has Mizian Mortar, so I think he's debating about whether wants to play this Domri, whether or not he simply wants to Mortis this turn. If I'm Chris, all I want to do is cast removal spells, keep the board clear, and try to take over your more powerful effects.
Yeah, I'm with you because basically Domri can just die to the Frostburn Weird right now if JD has a 3rd island.
It's possible Chris is actually happy for JD to spend his entire turn doing that in lieu of playing something like Thassa or Nightveil Spectre, but I still think I would prefer using a removal spell at that stage.
Yeah, I like just clearing the path, making sure that you don't have, make sure there's no devotion in play whatsoever.
Although Chris definitely got paid off for that play as JD does not have a 3rd blue source of mana. So if Chris knew that this was going to happen for sure, then I like the Domri play. Mm-hmm. No way he's armed with that information, but this works out a little bit better for him.
Yeah. So JD can still attack Domri for at least 1, possibly 2, 3. But it looks like he has a Judge's Familiar in his hand, along with a bunch of reactive spells like Rapid Hybridization and Cyclonic Rift. So let's see what he decides to do here. Looks like he's just going to attack for 1. No pumps. And I believe he attacked Chris. He does not care about the Domri. That might be because he has a Cyclonic Rift in his hand.
Yeah, or he just feels like doing the 1 point of damage here doesn't really impact Domri very much in the scheme of things. Mm-hmm. Also, by not pumping that second time, he is very loudly representing a trick. It can be a range of tricks. We could be looking at potentially Rapid Hybridization, Cyclonic Rift, Negate, Essence Scatter, Gainsay, all cards JD's representing right now.
Well, the really interesting thing here is JD drew the 1 copy of Nykthos in his deck, and he has the Cyclonic Rift. So if he's able to get Devotion, build up his Devotion, he's going to be able to overload Cyclonic Rift, which would be really devastating. And it looks like Chris is going to cast the Mizian Mortars now. And JD does have a Rapid Hybridization. He might kind of just cash it in. And looks like he is going to do that. He casts Rapid Hybridization on his Frostburn Weird in response to get himself a 3/3 Beast.
And to your point previously, this is actually a spot where JD's getting punished a little bit by not dealing that 1 point of damage to Domri last turn. As I guess if... Well, yeah. He didn't want to chop block with the Carrot this turn. But if that Domri was at 4 loyalty, then the Frog and the Judge's Familiar finishes off potentially. But instead, Domri will go unchecked at least 1 more turn.
Yep. So looks like JD might have drawn an island for the turn. Yes. So now he's going to be able to cast a Nightveil Spectre in his hand. Fortunate for him. And he can attack Domri now if he chooses and see if Chris wants to chump block. But it looks like he might just go after Chris here. With Chris at 17, yep, he's going to just drop Chris down to 13. Now if he plays Nightveil Spectre, he'll have access to 5 mana next turn with the Nykthos.
Well, the issue is that JD knows there's a Gore-Clan Rampager in Chris's hand, so that, with the fight ability alongside Domri, can take care of this Nightveil Spectre. With only representing colorless mana, Chris doesn't have to worry about playing around anything. It could also be a Stormbreath Dragon here. Yeah,
so Stormbreath Dragon is going to fight Nightveil Spectre. And yeah, I agree with you. He knows about the Gore-Clan Rampager, so at the very least, he knew that creature could get fought.
Yeah.
So JD here in a tough spot. He does have a Domestication, but he doesn't have any good targets right now.
Yeah, he can clear out the Stormbreath Dragon for a turn if he wants to take care of Domri, but as you said, not a great board for Domestication right now.
I believe he might have a 2nd Rapid Hybridization, and he might have another Nightveil Spectre as well. But again, with Domri at 3, he'll be able to fight again. So pretty tough spot for him. Not sure he can really afford to just tap out again to cast Nightveil Spectre because he'll just lose it to Stormbreath Dragon.
Yeah, and this all gets back to the play you pointed out before. JD deciding to attack Chris for 1 point damage instead of not going after Domri has set the table for Domri to be in play for multiple turns now.
Yeah, he would have been able to. I think Domri probably would have been able to die this turn just from the Judge's Familiar, because he could have rapid hybridization as the Stormbreath Dragon and attack through. But instead, JD has to face down a Domri and a Stormbreath Dragon. Chris doesn't have enough mana to monstrous it, but I don't think he even cares about that at this point.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see how Chris wants to navigate this turn. JD is representing a lot of tricks by just not casting anything and saying go. If I was in Chris's spot, I would not want to use the Domri fight power, or just try to plus Domri and find other ways to develop your board.
So, yeah, it looks like Chris has a lot of options. He has a second Stormbreath Dragon along with a Xenagos Reveler, and he's going to lead with a Stormbreath Dragon.
And I like this play from Chris, leading off with the Stormbreath Dragon, seeing how JD reacts, and then deciding what he wants to do with Domri from there.
Yep, so Chris is going to attack JD for 8. JD is at 20 currently. I'm not sure. I think JD's best bet is to probably just take it here. I don't really see him. If he wants to, I think his plan has to be to try to get rid of the Domri. But it looks like he is going to just rapid hybridization the one of the Stormbreath Dragons.
And you can see when the Mono Blue Devotion doesn't have either Thassa or Master Waves, its big payout cards, and is forced to play a much more honest game, it looks like a much more manageable deck to fight.
Yeah. So JD got a little fortunate there. Chris did actually activate Domri after the fact, and then JD used the Cyclonic Rift on it. So now Domri is at 1 and will fall to the Judge's Familiar. So that makes things a little easier. Now he can actually cast Domestication on the token, attack Chris for 4. I think he probably goes after the Domri, though, with one of those creatures.
Yeah, this is a really big swing for JD.
Yeah, very fortunate for him there. He doesn't have that much gas left. He has a Naval Spectre and a Domestication, but at least he's in a better spot than he was a turn ago.
Yeah, the tempo of the game has definitely swung from this spot.
So let's see here. Chris decides to take out Domri, and the 3/3 is going to go after Chris. And Chris drops down to 7 or 10.
Yeah, this is one of those spots where it's possible Chris's deck is just not going to have enough time to deploy everything that he needs to in the face of the overall efficiency of Mono Blue Devotion.
So Chris drew a Kiora for the turn. And like you said, he's not going to be able to really cast multiple spells. He can cast... he has a lot of high-impact cards, but he's only be able to go 1 a turn. And against a tempo deck, that sometimes might not be enough. So JD near here has 2 3/3s, a Judge's Familiar, and a Mutavault that he can use to attack.
Yeah, it's tough if you're in JD's spot here. You know, if you're going to attack in, you're certainly going to lose one of your creatures, the Stormbreath Dragon, but you know Chris's hand has to be chock full of really powerful stuff. Can you afford to sit back on defense?
Yeah, I don't think he wants to. Yeah, if he's gonna attack, his best attack is probably just to go all in with everything and then get a Night Veil Spectre into play. At that point, Chris could easily just chump there and take 5, or maybe he just blocks Mutavault. He'll take 4, drop to 6. You still give yourself outs, and obviously Thassa is probably your best out.
Yeah. You can always you can almost always play the game to the point where Thassa is a win somehow. You had to be losing by a lot for Thassa to not give you a chance.
Yes. So let's see what he decides to do here. He's going to lead by casting Night Veil Spectre. I'm with you. I think you have to attack with everything, but it looks like he's going to pass here. Try to maybe draw into the second Cyclonic Rift.
I actually like holding off here because you still need, you most certainly, or not most certainly, but most likely still need a sufficient devotion count for Thassa to even do anything. So he starts running, for example, his creature with Domestication into the Stormbreath Dragon. You lose 2 devotion there, and so forth.
Well, as long as you can, but you can still give your other creatures unblockability. So he might get Chris low enough where that's all that matters.
Sure.
So now Chris just drops a Kiora into play, and he also casts an Elvish Mystic. So now he basically gets another blocker into play, along with dealing with one of the threats that JD has, which I believe was Night Veil Spectre.
The thing about it is with the Nykthos in play, JD can play a little bit more of a conservative game because if he actually draws Thassa, mana's not going to be a bottleneck. He's going to have so much mana to work with that he can likely play Thassa and win in 1 turn. It's not unrealistic.
So let's see what he draws for the turn. He does have currently 6 devotion, so Nykthos and 2 land will tap for 6. He has plenty of mana if he actually draws that Cyclonic Rift. Cyclonic Rift is obviously probably game over if he draws it, but looks like he just drew a land and he passes for the turn.
And I've been in this spot a lot of times, the spot that Chris is in right now, where you're starting to cast your 5 and 6 mana spells against Mono Blue Devotion. You're starting to get the game turnaround, but there's still a lot of draws you have to avoid.
Yep. Yeah, there's so many cards that can just change the game for you. And looks like he's upticks Xenagos to generate more mana. Or no, I think, he just played his Xenagos for the turn. Now he's deciding what he wants to do. He might want to just create a token, or he wants to generate mana, perhaps, and cast another spell from his hand. We know he has a Gorklan Rampager still in his hand.
Yeah, I mean, the 2/2 is fairly anemic on this board, of course. He's looking into a sea of 3/3s right now, so I think he's likely to make mana if he can do anything productive with it, and if not, he'll make the token.
Yeah, so he's going to make a token, and Kiora is going to target the Nightveil Spectre again. And he's not really in a position, he doesn't want to start attacking yet, although, yeah, it looks like he's just going to pass the turn. He was just waiting for one big attack, probably with a monstrous Stormface Dragon.
Yeah, just try to hold down the fort as long as he possibly can.
So JD still doesn't draw anything, doesn't draw a Cyclonic Rift or Thassa, just draws a Cloudfin Raptor. He still has an island in his hand. So he's basically just waiting to die at this point. Chris is pretty close to putting together a really lethal attack. Plus, Kiora is close to ultimating.
Yeah, but all these things can easily be undone by Cyclonic Rift. So as powerful and commanding as Chris's board looks right now, he certainly does not have the game locked up.
He has one Cyclonic Rift left in his deck, plus the 4 Thassas. Thassa, obviously, still would be pretty good as well. He's able to give 2 creatures unblockability, and then Chris is basically going to have to try to kill him in one turn. So Xenagos gets upticked.
So that's 5 mana.
Might see Stormbright Dragon get monstrous, exactly what happens. So JD takes 1 damage from the card in his hand, so it drops to 15, and then Stormbright Dragon gets 3 counters on it. So we have a 7/7 dragon on Chris's side of the board.
And I suspect this is where Chris is going to make his move and start attacking.
Yeah, I mean, he's basically, the only flyer he has to worry about is the Judge's Familiar and the Cloudfin Raptor, potentially. So yes, he's going to attack with the Stormbright Dragon. JD's at 15. I think he probably just takes it.
I think that's the most likely scenario. Although, there is an argument for chump blocking now because it's not clear if you're going to get an opportunity to chump block later.
Yeah, the Cloudfin Raptor is probably your best
For
bet.
example, yeah, because in what world is Cloudfin Raptor good? If you draw running creatures to evolve Cloudfin Raptor, it's likely that you lose, unless it was Thassa, in which case you win anyway.
Yeah.
Or you likely win anyway, so.
Yep, so Gorklan Rampager tramples right over, so JD's going to take 10, dropping to 5.
Yeah, and keep in mind, this is a pretty rough spot for JD, as he can't actually chump block with Judge's Familiar since it's a white creature. So the Nightveil is the last chump blocker remaining.
Yeah, so Xenagos comes down, destroys his other Xenagos, but he's going to make another token. So Chris, basically, at this point, I think JD's only option is a Cyclonic Rift.
But it would be a really good one, to say the very least.
So let's see here. He doesn't, he just passive a turn. If he had Cyclonic Rift, he likely just cast it there.
Yeah.
Because he still has the Nightveil Spectre back to block. And Chris draws a card for turn, plays a Temple, keeps on top. At this point, he only has a Nightveil Spectre to block. He can make another 2/2 Haste Satyr with Xenagos God of Revels.
Yeah, but attacking on the ground right now for Chris is not that productive.
Yeah.
As JD has quite a few blockers. He has a Mutavault and 2 3/3s, so these 2/2s and 1/1s aren't really adding that much to the clock.
Hybridization could buy him a JD a turn, so he also has 1 copy of Disperse in his deck. So it looks like Stormbreaker is going to come over, and then Nightveil jumps in front of it immediately.
Yeah, and I like that level of conservativeness from Chris there, as, again, attacking with his 1/1s and 2/2s and those 2 3/3s on the ground, not the most productive thing.
So Chris is going to make another Satyr with the Xenagos, and let's see here. Does he decide? Yep, he's going to go Ultimate with Kiora here.
Decides to go Ultimate rather than simply uptick.
So Kiora is going to get, he's going to get a 9/9 Kraken at the end of his turn.
Yep.
but that will still get bounced by Cyclonic Rift. So Cyclonic Rift still live for JD here,
Yeah.
despite everything.
It does allow Chris a little bit of a rebuild in the event of Cyclonic Rift as he gets the, he has to Cyclonic Rift right away because he's facing lethal attack. And then Chris can rebuild his board a little bit post-combat and still make a 9/9 to block.
Yep, so JD does not draw the Cyclonic Rift, and he falls to Chris in game 2. So now things are evened up. But JD is going to get to be on the play again.
Yeah, and even though that game, of course, Chris did win, I do have my concerns about how his deck is structured for the matchup. He has a lot of unwieldy tools, multiple copies of Xenagos, the Reveler. Even Stormbreath Dragon is not the leanest, most efficient threat against Mono Blue Devotion. If JD is able to get a good start on the play, I think Chris is going to struggle to keep up.
Yeah, if JD can get the Cloudfin Raptor start, I think it's going to be really tough for Chris to kind of come back from that because he doesn't have a lot of removal spells. I mean, he was pretty fortunate to draw a Amizium Mortars. So he was able to use Amizium Mortars and a Domri activation to kill 2 of JD's creatures.
Yeah, and Chris is going to have issues with his mana as well, in the same way that Esper does. He has a lot of comes into play tap lands and a lot of Ravnica duels as well. So if he's missing colors early, can't cast his spells on time, has to take damage off of his lands, these are all things that add up for Mono Blue Devotion.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to think that JD actually had more color issues than Chris's Rug deck because he had the Nykthos in play, so he wasn't able to go turn 3 Night Veil Spectre, which could have been the difference right there. So pretty fortunate there for Chris, but I'm with you. I still think the Mono Blue Devotion deck is probably a little favorite in this matchup.
Yeah, this is kind of the reason you saw a regression of fancy creature decks since Born of the Gods have come out. It's just Mono Blue Devotion's mixture of flyers and tricks and bounce spells and Thassa. Very challenging to beat, and there's a lot of beatdown decks that just can't beat Master Blaze outright.
Yeah, and it's funny. One of the decks that was really problematic for Mono Blue Devotion was Mono Black Devotion. I mean, obviously you had players who said that, the matchup can go either way, but, Desecration Demon, Pack Rat, those are very problematic cards for Mono Blue Devotion, and you don't see those really around that much very often. So I'm surprised that people who love playing Mono Blue haven't kind of capitalized that and to come back to the fold.
Yeah, it was this interesting cycle where the Mono Blue Devotion decks that we saw in the Open Series, at least, were splashing white early on in Born of the Guards for Afara and Detention Sphere. Detention Sphere being, of course, a very good answer to Pack Rat and Desecration Demon. 2 cards that you just mentioned that are absolutely among the biggest problems for Mono Blue Devotion. The problem is that you really can't afford to play that many lands that come into play on untapped or not cast your spells on time because the Blue Devotion deck is, at its core, a tempo deck, and it really leans on casting its spells in an efficient, timely fashion. So playing comes into play tap lands or taking damage off of lands or not having white mana every game to be able to cast the Detention Sphere in your hand, whatever, ended up being too big of a cost, and we never really saw blue-white Devotion decks take off in the way that some of us anticipated once those decks started cropping up when Born of the Gods came out. But the Mono Blue list is still exactly as good as it ever was. I mean, it won the first Open in Nashville with no cards from Born of the Gods. That was our first Open with Born of Gods, and it's still a player in the metagame, and I think things have shifted to the point where it's a good call again. It was being pushed down a lot by Mono Black and by Esper, but the metagame is opening up a little bit. There's way more aggressive decks in this tournament than we've seen recently, and Blue Devotion is still excellent against those.
Yeah, I think it's one of those decks. Same thing with Mono Black Devotion. I think all of these decks are good. It's not like they suddenly became terrible. It's just that people maybe they just got tired of playing them. But for one reason or another, they kind of shifted away in popularity. But I really don't think that they've gotten worse or anything. Even with the rise of Jund monsters, I still feel like a lot of these decks would be happy to play against those decks round after round.
Yeah, and I think Blue Devotion is really happy to play against most 2.5 color decks that are not playing with Supreme Verdict. Because even if you have the right spells to win the matchup, your lands are as big of an issue as anything else.
Yeah, the one thing you can't take away from either Mono Blue or Mono Black Devotion is their consistency. Yep. They're very consistent decks. You don't have to mulligan very often with them, and they do the same thing every single round. So you can always count on them, and that's what I think is probably their biggest strength is they have high-quality cards, high-power cards, yet they're very consistent as well.
Yeah, I feel like Mono Blue Devotion wins a lot of matches 2 games to 1, where in one game, it did its Mono Blue Devotion thing, and in the other game, the deck just missed something, and the blue deck was able to capitalize.
So here's the kind of start that we were talking about that JD kind of needed. He's got turn 1 Cloudfin Raptor, although Chris leads with a turn 1 Elvish Mystic of his own. So let's see what JD has for his turn 2. Is he able to grow the Cloud from Raptor?
Yeah, any sort of follow-up here from JD would be a really powerful opening, and it looks like he has something.
Yep, so Frostburn Weird comes down, Cloud from Raptor will evolve to a 1 power, and he's going to swing over, dropping Chris to 17.
And now this is the type of game where there's a lot of pressure on Chris's lands to come into play at the right order without him taking too much damage, as JD has one of his explosive starts.
So Chris does have the cards he kind of needs to contend with this type of start. Unfortunately, he's taking a lot of damage from his own lands, so he's going to drop to 15. He has the Mizzy Mortars, though, so Mizzy Mortars can take out... so he chooses to go after the Frostburn Weird instead of the Cloudfern Raptor. Interesting. So Cloudfern Raptor is still going to pose a threat here, and Chris further develops his mana by casting a second Elvish Mystic.
Yeah, and it's possible that Chris just has to be concerned with JD's overall devotion count and has to go after the weird there. He also might not have something large enough to easily block it.
Yeah, well, he does have the Courser of Prufix in his hand, and it looks like he has, he has Unravel the Aether as well, so that is a potential way to stop a Thassa. But yeah, you're right, he doesn't really have any way to deal with the Master Wave, so maybe he was afraid of Devotion. But either way, JD has 4 points of Flyers in play right now. And Chris is going to play a Courser, and he's going to play a Steam Vent off the top of his library, gain a life, so he's up to 13, but he's still facing 4 points of damage in the air.
And he also knows that JD gets to make a land drop next turn, as that Nightveil Spectre is going to take the breeding pool.
Yeah, so pretty cool interaction there with Courser and Nightveil Spectre.
Oh, playing with the top card of someone's deck reveal leads to a lot of pretty fascinating gameplay. We've seen this the last couple weeks.
So JD plays a Mutavault for the turn, so it looks like he's going to just take the breeding pool. And it looks like he has one of the rapid hybridizations in his hand, and I'm not sure if that's another Nightveil Spectre, but if it is, that'd be a huge drop as well, just getting more Flyers into play.
Yeah, but he's in a spot now where he does have to respect the possibility of an overloaded Mizzy Mortars. I'm not sure how much stock he's going to give to that possibility, as, you know, Chris would have to have untapped red mana. His deck maybe doesn't have a lot of that to generate off of most lands, but you can tell it's giving JD pause. If you're wondering why he isn't just saying, okay, I'll attack you for 4 and play my Nightveil Spectre, he does have to worry about the possibility, however slight, of an overloaded Mizzy Mortars next turn.
So it looked like JD was reading whether or not he had to take the breeding pool, but he does put the breeding pool on the Nightveil Spectre, and Chris reveals a Cyclonic Rift, and now he reveals a Mizzy Mortars. So 2 removal spells on top of Chris's deck are going to try to help him get back into this game. So like you said, overload Mizzy Mortars. Very, very close to being a real possibility here. He does only have 2 red, but he's going to be able to scry here, and he still has that Courser in play.
Well, the biggest issue is he has to find an answer to that Nightveil Spectre before Mizzy Mortars is even something that he has access to the following turn.
Well, he could, yeah. Nightveil Spectre could potentially just steal it. He has the Cyclonic Rift, though, so he can bounce it for the turn.
Yeah. But now we're getting into some jockeying over position here. I'm sure Chris would love to draw this Mizzy Mortars, even if he doesn't get an opportunity to overload it. Just a removal spell is really good for him here.
So Chris gained a life off of the Temple from the Courser ability, and it looks like he has a Negate in his hand, and an Unravel the Aether, and that Cyclonic Rift that we mentioned.
And this is a great contrast between these two decks. Just the efficiency that JD has versus the power of Chris. Chris trying as hard as he can to get the board stabilized, but between all these tricks and various efficient Flyers, it's just a very challenging thing to do.
So it looks like JD drew another Flyer. He does have a Judge's Familiar, which will help him evolve one of his Cloudfin Raptors.
Also gives him insurance against Mizzy Mortars too, which he's definitely in the market for.
Yeah. However, this is going to be a tough spot for JD, though, because he's still, even with the Judge's Familiar, I think an overloaded Mizzy Mortars will still probably resolve if Chris draws a 3rd red source. So let's see here. Judge's Familiar comes down. Chris has a Negate. Yeah, he still has a Cyclonic Rift, so Cyclonic Rift can get cast for 2 mana if he just wants to draw that Mizzy Mortars. So Judge's Familiar does resolve, and it's going to evolve a Cloudfin Raptor. Looks like Chris is still contemplating whether or not he wants that to resolve. And yes, it looks like he is going to respond to the Judge's Familiar by casting Cyclonic Rift on the Nightveil Spectre. And it looks like JD might actually cast Rapid Hybridization in response to evolve both his Judge's
Yeah, this could be a big rapid
Cloud from Raptors.
This could be a big rapid hybridization. Again, the concern is Mizium Mortars.
Yes. But nope, it looks like he's just going to let it get bounced. And Judge's Familiar resolves now, and Cloud from Raptor resolves. Evolves.
And this is the squeeze that JD is in right now. He needs to win the game. He wants to conserve some resources in the threat of Mizium Mortars, but the longer he drags out this game, not only does Chris get to sort of do his thing and keep making land drops and stuff, the points of life he gains off of Course of Krufix become valuable as well.
Yeah. So Chris does reveal a red mana, but it is a Temple of Abandon, so it will come into play tapped. He will gain a life off the Courser, bring him up to 9, and he's going to reveal yet another Temple. So Chris, in pretty good shape right here. He's going to scry the Temple to the bottom of his library, and is a second Mizium Mortars. So now he's got Mizium Mortars, Unravel the Aether, and then the Gate in his hand.
Yeah, he's really starting to get set up now. And he's got a lot of mana to work with, too.
And it looks like we're going to see what the last card in his hand is. Might be, oh, it's a Xenagos. So, wow, he actually has plenty of red mana. He didn't even need the Temple. So it looks like he might just cast Mizium Mortars here to kill the Cloudfin Raptor. And we're going to see a Rapid Hybridization in response. Is Chris going to use the Negate on it?
I like using Negate here.
So, yep, Negate is going to get cast, and Hybridization will get countered. Does JD have a second copy of Hybridization, and does he even want to use it here?
I don't even. Does he have a card left over in his hand right now? He's got one face down.
I think he might have one face down card. Yes, he does have a second copy of Hybridization. So yes, the Cloud from Raptor will get replaced by a 3/3, and the second Cloud from Raptor will evolve. But Chris is at 9, so not the worst shape for him, and he does have that second Mizium Mortars on top of his library.
Yeah, but he's right now just playing into the maws of that Mortars. I mean, that Rapid Hybridization maybe would have given him some flexibility or some way to finagle around it, but now he's in a lot of trouble.
He needs to top deck a Biden here. Biden can get him right back into it. Beyond that, though, he's going to just get blown out by the Mizium Mortars.
Yeah. His hand is just Nightveil Spectre right now. We know this from the Cyclonic Rift last turn, plus whatever he drew this turn.
Yeah, and he can't cast Nightveil Spectre. The Courser of Krufix is holding back the Mutavault, and it can also block the 3/3. So really not a lot of options for JD here. He can attack for 3 in the air, dropping Chris to 6, but again, that's pretty much the extent of the offense he's going to be able to mount right here.
Yeah. And pound per pound from this stage, Chris's draws are going to be a lot more high impact than JD's. We're looking at Master Waves and Thassa, possibly Biden and Jace being meaningful cards, versus Chris's deck that has no end of Planeswalkers, 5 and 6 mana spells. Draw step to draw step definitely favors Chris from this vantage point.
Okay, so JD did have a Cyclonic Rift in his hand. He's going to activate Mutavault and attack with everything. So now this is an interesting spot here. Chris can't realistically block with both of his Elvish Mystics because he's going to want to be able to overload Mizium Mortars. And if he blocks with one of them, he's not going to be able to cast it with protection from Judge's Familiar.
Yeah. And JD also gets to have a really impressive turn this turn without having to deploy his Nightveil Spectre too. So he has something left over in the tank after this Mizium Mortars.
Yeah, a flyer, which is really important.
Yeah.
So, this is a really tough spot for Chris. He's going to be, I think he can go to 1 if he takes it all. That's 5, 6, 7, 8. So he'll drop to 1.
But not only does he need to overload Mizium Mortars, he needs to leave something back to chump block this Mutavault the following turn.
Yeah.
It's not even just about the Nightveil
So
Spectre.
it's actually, he actually can't take it because if his plan is to try to overload Mizium Mortars, then he just loses because the Judge's Familiar can counter it, and then he'll have to tap his last Elvish Mystic.
Yeah, Chris might need to about face here where he says, for example, I'll double block the Mutavault, I'll untap, I'll use this Mizium Mortars on a single target, and then I'll play Courser and try to rebuild. But
yeah,
overloading Mizium Mortars may just be off the table right now.
I think it's off the table. He has to my plan has to be now double block, kill your Mutavault, play Courser, hope to hit a land to gain a little more life, and then Mizium Mortars your Cloudfin Raptor.
Yeah, and you can see the difference in the potency of Cyclonic Rift in these two decks because one is just so much more efficient than the other.
Yeah, so pretty good turn there for JD. Not only was able to prevent him from getting blown out by Mizium Mortars, but He still has that Night Veil Spectre in his hand, like we mentioned.
Yeah. And again, speaking to efficiency, if Chris loses this game, it's likely to be with numerous cards left over in his hand.
So Courser Crucifix comes down, and there's a Mistcutter Hydra, but that's not nearly as devastating for JD, given the fact that he's really far ahead right here.
Yeah.
So Night Veil Spectre, let's see if that's going to be the card that comes down this turn. Yep, he only has 3 mana, so attacks with Judge Familiar. Chris falls down to 2, and now we're going to see a Night Veil Spectre. So Chris, we know the top card is a Mistcutter Hydra, and there's just a land. But yeah, he doesn't really have any ways to interact with flyers.
Yeah, he's just got an Unravel the Aether, a Xenagos, and a Mistcutter Hydra, nothing that provides any defense to flyers.
Yeah, so he can play the land, gain a life, go up to 3, but there are still 3 points of damage in the air. So wow, it looks like JD might actually pull this game out despite the fact that, you know, it looked like Chris was doing pretty well, but it just goes to show you that Mono Blue Devotion deck, it's such a tempo deck that out of nowhere, it can just pull out a win.
Yeah, and 4 damage off of his own lands to start off the game.
Yep.
Just little pieces of efficiency here and there that the Mono Blue Devotion deck picks up. And that's all it takes for it to steal a match.